What's up, guys? This is Taking the Field with Stevie Mac, and on this episode, I want to give you guys my Premier Lacrosse League preseason power rankings for 2021. Obviously, this week we're in the middle of preseason training camp. The season starts on June 4th later on this week, so let me give you guys real quick my preseason power rankings. And obviously, I think the clear and obvious choice for number one is the Whip Snakes. I mean, it has to be, right? Their defense in 2020 was rated the number one defense in pro lacrosse history in terms of opponent shooting percentage, although many people have argued that with the shorter shot clock now that has played a factor in that, but still statistically one of probably the, at least I'd say, top 5 defenses in pro lacrosse history. Well, that defense from 2020 is returning this year after being protected by Jim Stagnita in this year's expansion draft with the Cannons, and their offense returns, or should I say features, the last 2 MVPs in the league in Matt Rambo and Zed Williams. Now, Joe Nardello was automatic at faceoffs last summer, winning 72% of his faceoffs, while also scooping up 65 ground balls and registering 6 points during the championship series. And in the offseason, they lost a guy like Ty Warner to med school. Obviously, good luck to him in his endeavors, but they replaced him with a guy in Charlie Hayes, who was seen as one of the top D mids in the MLL bubble last summer. So I think it'll be interesting to see how he comes into the PLL and adjusts to possibly a slightly bigger role and slightly bigger talent that he's going up against. But I think offensively, they added guys like Connor Kirsten, Ryan Tierney to a team that already featured guys, as I mentioned, Matt Rambo, Zed Williams, and even Brad Smith, just to name a few. And in my opinion, and I said this after the championship series ended last summer, Jim Stagnita, in my opinion, is starting to become sort of the Bill Belichick of pro field lacrosse, because look at his resume just in the last 2 years. Back-to-back champions, number one defense in pro lacrosse. If you want to put an asterisk next to that, go ahead. But back-to-back MVPs. The Whipsnakes are quickly becoming sort of the gold standard in pro field lacrosse. Now, number 2 was interesting for me in these power rankings because I have the Redwoods number 2, but I really went back and forth a lot between the Woods and the Chaos at 2 and 3. So I think you can kind of guess who I have or will have in a minute at number 3, but the Woods came into the offseason, the bulk of the offseason, specifically during draft time with the entry draft, the college draft, all that, with one real clear need, and that was at faceoff, which they definitely, I think, improved upon by drafting T.D. Erlin 4th overall and Charlie Leonard with the final pick, both coming in that college draft. And offensively, they're pretty stacked at attack, which is something that I'll mention throughout this episode with basically each one of these teams that we go over. But they'll have, Kavanaugh, Garnsey, Rob Pinnell comes over from the Atlas, and they'll get Jules Henningberg back on the field after missing 2020 with complications physically due to COVID-19. Obviously, that was a big loss for them last summer, so even just getting him back on the field part-time this summer, I think, will be a big boost to their team and their offense more specifically. And their midfield, I think, as talented as their midfield might be, it seems a bit old to me when you look at them compared to some of the other teams in the PLL, with their youngest offensive mid being Sergio Perkovic at 26 years old, a guy like Miles Jones just a little bit older than him at 28, so a little bit of a older midfield group with this Redwoods, but again, still a very, very talented group nonetheless. And the Woods defense is still one of the more intimidating defenses that you'll find in the PLL. They'll all pretty much return here in 2021, kind of that same idea with the Whipsnakes D. And now they have a little bit of a battle going on in training camp at the goalie position. Tim Troutner, obviously more than likely going to be their day one starter as he's been the last 2 years. But now you've got guys like Jack Kelly and Brian Phipps in camp, making that position a little more interesting, at least in the past few days. So third, as I mentioned, is the Chaos. Andy Towers loves himself some Canadians, so much so that I actually named my fantasy league this year Towers Loves Canadians, or TLC for short. However, that will actually in a way hurt him at the beginning of the year, it looks like, as a number of his players are unable to travel at the start of the season, including Tanner Cook, Curtis Dixon, and Miles Thompson, just to name a few of those. So with everything going on with COVID-19 and different countries like Canada having different restrictions on travel and such like that, obviously when you have a team loaded with Canadians, things like that can come back to bite you in a sense, as it did here. But anytime you can add the NCAA's all-time leading goal scorer in Mac O'Keefe to your offense, you're doing something right, in my opinion, and that's exactly what he did in this spring's college draft. The offense might be the deepest it's ever been under Towers with this Chaos team, with the likes of Curtis Dixon once they get him back, Josh Byrne, Austin Stotts, and Chris Cloutier, another guy that the Atlas traded away. Cloutier now with the Chaos. Those are basically some of your top attackmen, and then you add in a guy, like I said, in Mac O'Keefe to that unit, and then the midfield of Sergio Salcido, Dane Smith, Jake Fricaro, and Kyle Jackson, another guy that they added this offseason, another talented box-style player to this Chaos offense. And when you look at the defensive side of the ball, Blaze Reardon is the two-time goalie of the year, despite what Matt Gaudette might tell you if you remember back to the championship series and the chirping that went on there. But again, two-time goalie of the year kind of speaks for itself. And I like what they did at faceoff, losing Tommy Kelly to expansion, but they replaced him with Max Adler in the entry draft to help Austin Henningsen at the stripe this year. So the Chaos and Redwoods, I think, like I said, could easily go 2 and 2A. You could flip-flop them however you want, but that's how I have them going in the year. And then rounding out the top four, I have the Archers. Now, the Archers showed somewhat of a two-quarterback system last summer by running their offense through Grant Ament, who played at X, obviously, but he led the team in points and assists last summer. And they also ran it through Tom Schreiber from the midfield. The attack is loaded, just like I think you can make the case for any of these 8 teams. And it'll be interesting to see who comes out of the box for the Archers from that attack unit. I think the fan favorite is Connor Fields to do so, with guys like Ament, Marcus Holman, and Will Manny at the attack spots primarily, and then adding Trey LeClaire, who is another one of those guys in the league that's unable to travel currently, and Jeff Traynor to the midfield to go with Tom Schreiber will be a lethal grouping for sure once they get all three of those guys together. And then you look at the defensive side of the ball, they drafted Jared Connors to back up Scott Ratliff at LSM, and I think that was a very solid move coming in the first round, one of the first few picks of the college draft this spring. And Connors is a guy that can get up and down the field, as we've all seen him do this year at Virginia, and he makes things happen in transition. He finished the year with 4 goals and 6 assists during the 21 season with the Cavaliers. But the question that I have for the Archers, which I think you've sort of seen in each of the last 2 years, is how will the defense play? Drafting a guy like Connors and getting Jackson Place back from his horrific injury back in 2019, I think should help in ways, but I think just how much it will help will be the question, because we all know how ridiculously good they can be at the offensive end, but I feel like they get let down at times on the defensive end. So that'll be the thing to watch for me, at least in the early going with the Archers. Now, fifth, I have the Chrome. Tim Sudan took a 2-10 team in 2019, gave it a major facelift, and turned them into a competitive and fun team to watch during the championship series, finishing the championship series with a 3-2 record. At attack, the Chrome used Jordan Wolf, Justin Gutterding, and Matt Gaudette as the primary starters back then, but now they add guys like Colin Heacock and Jackson Morrill into the mix in 2021. So again, a lot of these attack groups that we're seeing this summer in the PLL are going to be seriously fun to watch. And then you look at the midfield for the Chrome, which features Will Hawes, Jordan McIntosh, Ned Crotty, and Jesse King, who's another one of those guys that's unable to travel currently, while also adding fellow Buckeye Ryan Terefenko and Tar Heel Justin Anderson over from the college draft. The Chrome defense might actually be worth paying attention to this summer, with Mike Manley, John Madursky, and Jesse Bernhardt returning, along with Eli Salama and Joel White, while adding JT Giles Harris to that unit with their first round pick, because Tom Rigney, according to Tim Sudan, will most likely have military duties to attend to. So the Chrome for me are on the fringe of being a top 4 team in the PLL, and I think the 2021 season will go a long way in determining just how close they are to accomplishing that goal. Now, number 6, I have the Atlas. You guys know by now I'm a huge Atlas fan. I've talked about the rebuild with Ben Rubior a lot this offseason, and I really like the moves that he's made, but really the games aren't won in the offseason. Now it's the time to prove it on the field. There's a lot of new faces on this team coming from a lot of different places, whether it's the entry draft, the college draft, wherever, trades, whatever it was. But I think the question is, how fast can they mesh together? And I think that the two-a-days that they're running during training camp right now will help speed that process up considerably, because on paper, this team has the makings to be a fringe top 4 team, just like I had the Chrome being. But again, lacrosse and sports in general aren't meant to be played on paper. So it's all about how this team can come out and play on the field, because most of their star-studded names like Ryan Brown, Paul Rabel, Rob Pinnell, Connor Busick, those guys are gone. And hopefully what's left is a young, versatile, athletic team that can play between the arcs like Ben Rubior wants, and more importantly, they can play unselfishly and play as a team, kind of knowing your role and doing your job. And Ben Rubior talked about wanting guys that are versatile, they're athletic, you can plug and play them in different spots in different situations. And I really think that, again, on paper, that's kind of the team that he's built here. And then you look at the defense should be much improved with the additions of a few former Outlaws in Michael Rexroad, Kyle Pless, and Andrew Newbold, plus their former defensive coordinator in Ken Clausen. So I think that at least hopefully the defense will be able to help out Jack Kincannon in the cage this summer, because he's had to stand on his head a lot in the last 2 years. So hopefully they can help him out in 2021. And I said Jack Kincannon, even with the subpar defense that he's had the last 2 years, has probably been a top 4 goalie in the PLL each of his first 2 years. And the Atlas finally got Trevor Baptiste some help at the stripe, by drafting Penn State's Gerard Arceri with their 4th round pick in this year's college draft. Now, 7th, I have the Water Dogs. Kieran McCardle, Ryan Brown, and Michael Kraus on attack just sounds so lethal until you realize that Andy Copeland was actually able to go out and get Michael Sowers with the 2nd overall pick in this year's college draft, which just makes this attack unit even more unfair to think about. The midfield should help complement the attack, I think, with guys like Connor Kelly, Drew Snyder, and then Mikey Schlosser coming over from the MLL, and a guy like Zach Curry as well. And defensively, the Water Dogs turned a 3rd round pick in 2021 into Eli Gobrecht to pair with Chris Sabia, Ben Randall, and Liam Burns. I think Noah Richard, if I remember correctly, has military service coming this summer, so they might not have him available. But for the guys that they will have available, that is a very solid defensive group to have in front of any one of the goalies that they currently have in camp, such as Charlie Cipriano or Matt DeLuca. And then they also went out and acquired Dylan Ward as well and brought him into the fold at goalie too. So I think the Water Dogs will be another one of those interesting teams to see how they progress in year 2 as a club under a guy like Andy Copeland. And then lastly, I have the Cannons, because they are the unknown this year, just like the Water Dogs were in 2020. And that's why the Water Dogs, to me, get a bump over the Cannons. But I also couldn't put the Water Dogs over the Atlas necessarily, because I think that the Atlas will be a whole different team here in 2021. One that I think the league isn't necessarily ready for. But again, with them, it all comes down to how do they mesh together? How do they get in sync with each other, and how do they play as a whole team and not just a few individuals? But as for the Cannons, as we round out this episode, they have a nice balance, I think, between young talent and seasoned veterans. But the problem with them, I think, is that they'll have to lean heavily on that veteran core in 21 and 2022, as Sean Quirk was aggressive in assembling his roster by especially trading away a lot of their draft capital in order to do so. And you can look at a trade like the Paul Rabel trade, for example, as giving up some decent draft capital in order to acquire a player who's now into his mid-30s. But I will say that Sean Quirk did use one of his few college picks that he had in this year's draft to acquire Jack Keelty out of Notre Dame, who should go well with some of the young pieces they have on defense, such as Reese Eddy, Curtis Corley, and Jake Pulver, all being mentored by one of the best to ever play that position in Brody Merrill. And offensively, they have Bryce Wasserman, Andrew Q, and Lyle Thompson. Anytime you have Lyle Thompson on your attack, I think you'll be more than okay offensively. And Shane Jackson, another guy, if you want to throw him in the mix as well, could make for an electric attack unit, while the hope in the midfield is that guys like Connor Busick's 2020 season was a bit of an anomaly for him, and other guys like Josh Courier and Max Tuttle can be sort of supporting pieces to that loaded attack group that I mentioned. But that is my power rankings for the PLL this summer. Let me know what you guys think. Again, I can go either or with the Redwoods and Chaos at 2 and 3, but let me know if I ranked somebody too high or maybe too low as we get set here for June 4th and the start of the PLL season. But that'll do it for me. I'll talk to you guys later.